Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I got a lot of really bad comments. Not bad comments, I guess, bad arguments in my last video that I put up on Sunday, which the irony isn't lost on me that in my video on Sunday, one of the major premises was that James Freeman was relying on bad arguments. James Freeman's bad argument was insinuating that being a cop was immoral, never proving it, but just insinuating it in his little, well, I'm going to pretend that I did an immoral job to see how the cop reacts to somebody else doing an immoral job. Of course, failing to grasp the distinctions between immoral and illegal, and failing to grasp that the role of a police officer is to enforce the law, to enforce legal things, or to restrict you from doing illegal things. So that distinction between a legal and an illegal job, a lawful and an illegal job, is something that is very integral to what James Freeman is trying to argue, and yet he ignores it completely. But there were a lot of bad arguments, and the first bad argument is directly related to that, where people want to argue that because cops arrest for contempt of cop, and I'm using that in huge air quotes, that they are not just enforcing the law, and that they do things based on whether they find them to be moral and immoral. Contempt of cop, whether the cop is upset with you or not, isn't a moral decision by the cop. It's an emotional decision, but it's not necessarily a moral decision by the cop, and the cops don't arrest for contempt of cop. Cops can only arrest for violations of the law, for specific violations of the law. It has to be some sort of a penal code or a vehicle code or something that allows for the officer to make an arrest. And there is no crime out there that I'm aware of called contempt of cop. So when the cop arrests for the, in air quotes, contempt of cop, what the cop is actually doing is arresting for some other violation of the law. Disorderly conduct, failure to ID, whatever. That is what the officer is arresting for. So when I said that the cops can only arrest you for violations of the law, for committing crimes, that still stands. Your argument is, again, a bad argument, because you're asserting that a cop reacting emotionally and deciding to make an arrest based on an emotional response is the same thing as the cop arresting someone based on his morals, which is different. And again, it's still down to whether or not what the actor was doing was legal or illegal. Second dumb argument that I've seen over the weekend is that, yeah, well, the Nazis on trial at Nuremberg were also only following orders, which is a completely asinine argument. The Nazis on trial at Nuremberg were on trial for war crimes. They were accused of committing war crimes, anywhere from starting a war, an unlawful war, whatever that is. I mean, that's a pretty fucking stupid thing to try someone over, but that's what some people were convicted of, all the way down to genocide, killing innocents, the gassing of the Jews, etc. There were also other trials at Auschwitz and other places, but that's the bulk of it. It's war crimes. That's what they were convicted of. They weren't convicted of obeying orders. Every soldier in Hitler's army was obeying orders when they were fighting against the Allies. Every single one of them. And yet, they were not charged with following orders. The people at Nuremberg were charged with war crimes. That is a substantial difference. Police officers aren't out there committing war crimes. Giving someone a speeding ticket is not a fucking war crime. It's just an asinine argument. Another argument that I've heard is something about the founding fathers rebelled over taxes. I don't know exactly where this came into play, but I read it in one of the comments, and it kind of stuck with me. And I often see references to the founding fathers and the American Revolutionary War. Here's some help for you guys, though. The American Revolutionary War was fought over representation. Laws were being made in England that were affecting the colonies, and the colonists had little to no say over those laws. And it's often phrased as taxation without representation, but it's it's really laws in general being made without any input by the people being governed. There were government structures in the colonies. The colonies themselves were each a government structure. They had constitutions or charters or what have you. They had governors. They had legislative bodies. They made and enforced laws in and of themselves. And yet the colonists didn't rebel against those colonies. They rebelled against Great Britain. They rebelled against the monarchy and the parliament because those were the areas where they were not being represented. So trying to make that argument against your local police is stupid, or against your state is stupid. They're not the same thing. You have representation in your city council. Your city is divided into different sections, and a different person is elected from each section, and that person essentially represents you. You have in the state, you've got your state assembly of some sort. Every state has a legislative body. Most of them are bicameral. Some, like one or two, aren't, whatever. But the point is, even at the state level, you have representation, local representation to you. The closest thing that you could get to the analogy would be a revolt against the federal government, which you saw in the Civil War. But again, it's not quite analogous because there is representation. You have a local, it's actually called a representative, your House of Representative. You have a local representative in addition to, the other representatives of your state and the senators of your state. They're all somewhat local to you. So the Revolutionary War thing is pretty ridiculous. It's never really sat well. It's a very poor analogy, and it's not a justification. Just because there was a revolution doesn't mean that all revolutions are good, because you have to remember that there was a revolution in Russia, there was a revolution in China, there was a revolution in Cambodia. Not all revolutions lead to good things. So it's a bad argument. It's a very weak argument. It's just an appeal to someone's patriotism. Well, if the founding fathers did it, it must be right in all circumstances. They rebelled against authority, so it's always good to rebel against authority. That's a very lazy, shitty argument to make. The founding fathers thought a long time about it, and they were very smart men, and they wrote a lot of treatises on it, whatever. They did it for very specific reasons. They didn't do it just because they didn't like that they weren't able to annoy the local school teachers by protesting outside of the schoolhouse. Finally, this last one is, I think, the piece de resistance. It's something along the lines of policing for profit is a problem. Policing for profit is a problem. And that is just the shittiest nonsensical statement that I have ever heard. Now, on the surface, it sounds like it makes sense. It sounds like it's a complete thought. Policing for profit is a problem. It sounds like it makes sense. But think about this for a minute. Policing for profit, what do they mean? Do they mean the individual officer being paid to do police work? Is plumbing for profit also a problem? Oh, hey, you know what? You shouldn't be taking money. We're a bunch of communists up in this joint. You shouldn't be taking money to go do plumbing. You shouldn't be taking money, I don't know, to be in the army. Soldiering for profit is a problem. Oh, all these soldiers getting paychecks. So I'm assuming that that's not what the argument is. I'm assuming that it is not a problem to have a professional police force that is well trained. I mean, if you think there are problems with our current reasonably well-trained police force where they do it day in and day out and they get briefings, they have to go through ongoing education, and they have to go through certifications. If you think they're bad, imagine just grab 5 auditors, the 5 best auditors you could think of. Give them guns and tell them to go out and enforce the law. Do you think they're going to do a good job of it? They're going to shit the bed. There are a lot of problems with the police, yes. But the fact that they are well trained has mitigated a lot of it. So I'm assuming that it's not just the fact that someone is employed as a police officer that is the issue. I'm assuming it's something along the lines of the tickets, the speeding tickets, the traffic tickets, and things like that. Well, I've done a couple of videos on it. I did one on the Tennessee, I believe it was the Tennessee State Police, who run a if all of their funding came from traffic tickets, and if they got every penny of every traffic ticket, they would still run a huge deficit in Tennessee because they do not generate nearly, I mean, not even half of what they spend on traffic tickets. And again, not all of the monies for traffic tickets go to the police. In fact, very small amounts probably do. And I also did another video on the same issue with the, it was the San Francisco, I was responding to a High Desert Community Watch video, and it was the San Francisco County Sheriff, I believe. And they run a massive deficit too. They don't bring in nearly as much in revenue from tickets as they spend. And again, a lot of the monies from tickets, depending on your state, are going to go to other things. Like they go to the courts, they go to the victims funds, like Victims Compensation Board. They go to all sorts of different things that don't necessarily, even if a city issues you a ticket, there's typically going to be state fees, state fund fees tacked onto that city ticket. So it generates a very small amount of money. But even let's just pretend, arguendo, let's assume that the theory is right, that these police departments are generating positive income, positive revenue by issuing tickets. Let's just pretend it is. Is that immoral? Well, first of all, the police don't create the laws, and they don't create the fines for violating those laws. So the police didn't determine that speeding or whatever traffic violation was a crime, and they didn't determine what the penalty for that violation would be. All they're doing is enforcing what the legislative bodies have set for them to enforce. So is it the police's fault, or is it the legislative body's fault? And if it's the legislative body's fault, then why aren't you doing something about the legislative body? Why are you focusing on the police actually enforcing what the legislative bodies have told them to enforce? It's fucking retarded. It is literally a retarded position to hold. The police don't determine where the monies from those tickets go. Again, the legislative bodies determine how those monies are allocated. But at the end of the day, is it immoral or a problem, in quotes, for society, be it the city, state, or federal law, whatever, to regulate traffic laws? Is that immoral? I would posit to you that it is not. There is a reason why we all drive on the right-hand side of the road. The reason for that is because it has been made the law. Everybody drives on the right-hand side of the road. That reduces accidents. If people could pick which side of the road they're on, I mean, there's nothing inherent about people driving on the right-hand side of the road. Go to England, they drive on the left-hand side of the road. But because everybody drives on the same side of the road because that's the law, then that keeps people safer. Because people drive at slower speeds, especially through residential neighborhoods, that keeps people safer. That keeps innocent parties safer. Having people obey stop signs and stoplights keeps people safer. Is it immoral for society to regulate those traffic laws? I don't think it is. And if society has the right to regulate them, to say what is right and what is wrong, then obviously society has to provide a consequence for failure to abide by those rules, by those traffic laws. Now, I don't know about you, but I can think of very few things that you could do to punish someone for violating a traffic law. Do we want to do corporeal punishment? No. Do we want to incarcerate people? No. So what is left? Well, what's left are fines. That's what's left. Now, you may have a reasonable discussion about how much of a fine is too much or how much of a fine is not enough. Reasonable minds can reasonably differ on that. But there's nothing in fining someone for violating a traffic law that is inherently immoral, unless they haven't committed it. But that's why we have a court system, which generally speaking is going to generally get things approximately right. I mean, they're not perfect. And if you think I'm saying the courts are perfect, I'm not. But I'm saying that generally speaking, our system of innocent until proven guilty and you have your day in court generally protects people. So the question becomes, if the legislative bodies have the right to make these laws and make the fines for them, and if it's not immoral for police to be police, and if the job of the police is to enforce these laws, then all you have to do is not break the law. All you have to do is not speed, not run traffic lights, make illegal lane changes, etc. And you don't have to pay these fines. There's nothing immoral about this. I don't see where the problem is. And that is the inherent flaw with a lot of these arguments. They sound plausible. Policing for profit is a problem. Sounds okay. That comment had a lot of thumbs up, like 6 or 7 thumbs up. But it made no sense. And I hope that by the end of this, you've stuck through it and you see that it makes no sense. But I'm sure that some of you will still think it is a problem because you're just determined that it's a problem and there's nothing that's going to change your mind. And I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the other people who are being reasonable and who are willing to think about these things with an open mind and to look at what is being said and to look at the potential solutions and to realize we have a pretty good system in the US. And the police aren't the problem. And if you think the laws are too oppressive, the police aren't the problem. It's the legislators that are making these laws. And you're just scapegoating the police because you're too small-minded to be able to articulate what the actual problem is and to get down to the root of what you think the problem is. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.